About a year ago, I turned plastic gloves into grape soda, and now I want to try turning them into hot sauce. This is something I've been wanting to do almost since this channel started, and in theory, it should be possible. To fully complete the reaction, though, I had to boil it for a while, and when it was done, I poured it all into a separatory funnel. This quickly separated into two layers, and for the grape project, I wanted the bottom one because it contained all of the sodium phthalate. I then had to wait for it to cool down, and when it was only slightly warm, I poured it all into a separatory funnel. The stuff that I had now looked a lot thicker and goopier than before, and by the time I was done adding it, I could already see some water separating out. When I eventually felt like I'd gotten rid of enough, I poured it all into a separatory funnel. It was all cloudy because it was full of water, and before moving on, I was gonna have to dry it. So, I poured it into another separatory funnel. I then added some saturated salt water, which would pull out most of the water. However, this didn't really seem to do anything, and this was because there was some sort of impurity. I was going to have to get rid of it, and to do this, I was going to have to put it back into a separatory funnel. I then added a different solvent called hexanes, which would dissolve most of the impurities. Either way, it was now time to try and separate out the nordihydrocapsaicin and to see if the reaction had actually worked. So I started the fun process by preloading a separatory funnel with some hexanes and dumping everything in. These two things didn't really mix together, and then I added a bunch of saturated salt water. What I had now looked pretty clean, but the extraction probably pulled out some other junk as well. I was going to have to get this out, and to do this, I had to put it all back into a separatory funnel. I then added some dilute hydrochloric acid, which would pull out any basic impurities. I set the reaction up in the exact same way as before, and when it was done 20 hours later, I added it to a separatory funnel. I also washed it with a bit of water to make sure that I transferred everything. I then added a bunch of saturated salt solution, and this easily dissolved everything. After that, I poured it all back into a separatory funnel, and I washed it a bunch of times with dilute hydrochloric acid, dilute sodium bicarbonate, and saturated salt solution. There was still a bit of junk floating around, but that was okay, and what I had to do next was pour it into one final separatory funnel. I also washed the beaker with a bit of water just to make sure that I transferred everything. I then started mixing it around, and now I was basically done. Finally, after probably way too much effort, I had actually made some synthetic hot sauce. The only problem was that I had no idea how spicy it was, and after my last experience, I was honestly a bit scared. I was also a bit worried that it wouldn't even taste good, but I guess there was only one way to find out. Oh god. It's not as bad. Okay. Honestly, it's pretty good. Okay, so it had apparently all worked out, and I was actually able to turn plastic gloves into hot sauce. For now, though, I think I need a break from doing so much organic chem. Instead, I think I'm going to work on more cutting edge projects, like pouring it all into a separatory funnel.